in this psalm, there is incorporated in it the vanity of life. It's just part of it is just part of the subject matter in this. To say it's an enjoyable study, it's not. To say this is one of those wonderful themes, it's not. It is not one of the theme psalms either. So for those that the ancient Hebrews that studied this, they didn't mark this as one of their favorite psalms like has been found in the other psalms that we look at. You won't find this one on the plaques like you find the 23rd psalm or like you find the 73rd psalm, like you find, in fact, the 118th psalm. You won't find them on plaques, not this one. It's not the type of thing that we really enjoy hearing, but it teaches us and it gets to the very core. It gets to the very core of humanity. The Bible says time and time again. Do you know every seventh verse in the New Testament, once you get past the Gospels, has something to do with giving or covetousness? It does. Every seventh verse. So it is a systematic problem in humanity. And that's what this deals with. It is the pressure that those that have wealth are able to bring to bear on righteous people. Now, does that mean there's no righteous that are wealthy? No, that's not what it means. What it means is that money influences almost everything. It influences government. It's probably the strongest, single most power exerted upon the direction of government. Like getting hold of a green sapling and pulling it over and holding it with some kind of stay or some kind of fastener and leaving it there for a couple of years. That sapling will never grow straight because it has been held in that position. Well, wealth holds direction. Wealth mandates direction. It does in our county level government, and we've seen that more than once. And you've been here longer than I, and I've been here 27 years, and I've seen that exerted more than once. All right? And so wealth has a way of making things go its way. All right? So you have problems here. I remember years ago in Idaho, several years ago we had a tax thing that they reformed. They brought people out of Austin and they went through the county and they said, this is not right, and we're going to restructure the tax thing here in Motley County. And boy, they did. Boy, and there were squeals everywhere, because they readjusted the tax on everything. That's the second time Judy Ann and I have been a part of that, because in Idaho, 3 or 4 years before we moved down here, they did the same thing. And the wealthy in the county, like one particular guy named Clyde McAfee, he had him, a little bit of money here and there, and the tax appraiser had his house at $28,000 appraisal value. And that house would sell anywhere at $150,000. And I'm talking about back in the 1980s. But because he had money and everybody knew he had money, he could direct the course of certain things. And he was just one of the great wealthy individuals in Butte County, Idaho. Well, that's the way things work, unfortunately. And what you find here is the complaint against that kind of thing. All right? That kind of thing. So the first several verses of introduction, they make no sense to what the context is that follows. It's like a train that has not yet backed up, an engine and the tender that have not yet backed up onto the track where the train is. You build the train, the hump yards build the train. And then it sits there all hooked up, the air set and all of that. And then the train, the engine comes from the wheelhouse, and it comes and backs up, and it couples up to the train. Then they release the air when the air builds up, and then off they go. Well, what you have is this psalm sitting here like a train on the track, and the introduction is like the engine. It's not hooked up to this thing. It's not. It's not hooked up to it at all. And it's kind of loopholed in his study of the Hebrew of this, and he wonders how that this makes connection to this, because the introduction gives you no information of what will follow. You know, I'm going to give a speech at Oklahoma Christian University Friday at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going to introduce that speech by certain phrases and certain illustrations that will lead into the body of the message, into the subject matter. And the illustrations are the leading statements in introduction. They're going to tell the listening audience what is in the body of the message. And that's the way public speaking generally does. You learn introduction to material. I helped McKenna last night. We were working on one of her papers, and she was following this outline they were given to follow. So it had to include in the body of the paper the things on the outline, and that's generally the way we do. This doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. He does not connect the introduction with the rest of the psalm. And that's why those that have studied this from the ancient days in Judea, they said this is didactic. There is a teaching element here that the first several verses do not alert you to, if you will, okay? That's just not there. Hear this, all you peoples. Give ear, all you inhabitants of the world. Both low and high, rich and poor together, my mouth shall speak wisdom, and the meditation of my heart shall be of understanding. I will incline my ear to a parable. Now, this is quoted in Matthew 13. All right? I will open my dark saying upon the harp. This is this is a figure of speech. And what it is, what he's saying is, now I'm going to throw some light on my life circumstances. I've inclined my ear. That's an expression used by the ancient writers, that this is coming by inspiration. In other words, I'm listening. And it is God that's given me instruction, so I'm listening. So that's the expression here, I will incline mine ear. It's also found in Psalm 78, verse 2. And that's the idea of it. Now, in verse 5, wherefore should I fear in the days of evil, when iniquity at my heels compass me about, or the iniquity of them that would supplant me compass me about, even of them that trust in riches. And so he's in a pressure. Get the picture. He's in a pressure cooker. And the ones applying the pressure are those that occupy the positions of wealth in this particular community. Okay? That's where he's at. That's what he's feeling. That's where the pressure is. It's round about him. And so he says, the iniquity of them that would supplant me, they want to get rid of him. They don't like this voice. They want to hush this up. And he says, they've encircled me, even them that trust in riches. And so that tells you, here is the source of their supposedly power, and he doesn't fit their idea of what a person in that situation ought to be. So he's getting a lot of pressure. See this? A lot of pressure. And he describes them for them. Look at verse 6. They that trust in their wealth. They that trust. Money's a shield. You and I know that. It's a shield. That's why we try to lay up something for our retirement. Because when we get to the age, our bodies will not allow us, and our minds, that will not allow us to work, then we hope that we have. I've heard people say, well, I sure hope I don't outlive my money. What are they saying? I don't outlive my money. Because, see, they recognize that money is a shield. All right? Money is a shield. And if I have enough of it, then I will not share in the common experience. You see? I will not share in the common experience. I told you wouldn't like this. It's not. Because all of us like to think, that we will not outlive our money and then be wards of the state. Wards of the state. So what you have here is they trust in their wealth and boast themselves in the multitude of their riches. None of them can by any means redeem his brother. You know that if I had $10 million, I could not save my brother's eyesight. If I had all the money amassed that all the politicians have wasted in the last 10 years, which would amount to trillions, I couldn't give my brother one glimmer of better eyesight right now. I couldn't do it. There's not any money in the world that would restore that right eye. Wouldn't do it. I mean, trillions of dollars wouldn't do it. Wouldn't do it. You can't buy health with money. You can buy treatments, but they only run so long, don't they? Nor give to God a ransom for him. You can't buy his soul. There's no such thing as, Judy Ann and I worked for years and years in the Northwest country where people would get dressed up on a certain day of the year, and they would go to the temple at either Salt Lake City or Idaho Falls, and they would be baptized by the Melchizedekan priesthood, not the Aaronic priesthood, but the Melchizedekan priesthood. And there's two different priesthoods, you know. You knew that, didn't you? You hadn't studied Mormonism, have you? Okay, so there's the Aaronic priesthood, and I think it's pretty Aaronic myself. There's the Aaronic priesthood, and then the Melchizedekan priesthood, and the Melchizedekan priesthood is the special high level of the Mormon church priesthood. Now, what they do is go in there and they do studies of the genealogy. They have made the study of genealogy more popular in America than anything else. So they study genealogies. And what are they looking for? They're looking for old Uncle Rastus that was a horrible, horrible guy, and he was just mean to everybody, even spit tobacco juice in his wife's iced tea, I mean, he's a mean guy, okay? He is mean, all right? And meanness finally just kills him, okay? So they, in their genealogy, they find old Uncle Rastus, and they find that he was never baptized. And so what they do, they dress up and they put on these particular garments, and they go up there and they tell, when the turn comes and this guy transcribes, we're going to get Uncle Rastus, and we're going to be baptized for Uncle Rastus. All right. Now, what's the purpose of baptism? Huh? That's right. And to put you where? Out of the kingdom of darkness into what? Aha, the kingdom of Christ. So let's say it's me, and I'm being baptized for Uncle Rastus, because I have people in my genealogy like him, okay? So I can relate. All right, so I'm baptized for him, okay? So something wonderful happens. What happens? No, Carol. Carol. Really? Yeah, yeah. Let me carry on my doctrinal essay. Okay. Well, what happens is, Uncle Rastus, does the Bible say that hell has gates? Yes or no? Yes. The Bible says the gates of hell shall not prevail against it, right? What's the purpose of a gate? That's right. A gate opens and closes, doesn't it? You following me? I'm telling you how this doctrine runs. Okay? So the gates of hell swing outward, and Uncle Rastus, guess what? He trots on out and he smells a little crispy, but he goes right in. He goes right into heaven. You think I'm pulling your leg, don't you? I am not. I'm telling you, Mormonism. I am. Oh, yeah. Now, what you have, of course, you wouldn't have anything like that in the church, wouldn't you? You wouldn't have people dying and going off in a holding place somewhere and staying, for example, in paradise. It's really not heaven. It's just kind of a place that they're waiting. And other people go off down here to Hades, and they're just hanging around down there. And then one day, they're all going to be brought out of both places, and then the ones that smell kind of burnt from being in Hades, guess what their sentence is going to be? You're going back to the fire. All right? And the ones that have been floating around here in paradise, then they're going to get to go on to heaven. They're going to get on the bus and go on to heaven. And if you think that's not a doctrine in the church, I'll eat your hat. I've heard that preached from this pulpit. Not from me, but I've heard it preached by good preachers. And the daddy of that doctrine is Brother E.C. Fuqua, years and years ago. That's right. The Bible says in Acts 2 he went to hell. That's right. Well, you get the Mormonism with that, and there you have. He goes down. How many gospel sermons would it take to clean out hell? One. Okay? So what you have here in verse 7 is that there's nothing that can redeem anyone but the power of God. You can't be baptized by proxy. You know, if you leave this world, that's your last opportunity. All right? And that's what I was trying to illustrate by this foolishness of some of these man-made doctrines. And some of them almost, Judy-Ann and I have sat in our own living room and had the bishop of the Mormon stake, S-T-A-K-E, had the bishop of the Mormon stake. There's so many wards that make up a stake, and the stake makes up, and it goes on up the pyramid till they get to the president of the Mormon church. At any rate, he is sat in our living room, and it's all you can do to keep from burst out laughing, because some of this is comic book type stuff. Well, for Bible students it is. Finally, my wife said after about 11 times, she said, Michael, I'm not going to do this anymore. You tell them that they can't come back. I said, we're just getting into this. She said, I can't take it anymore. I said, all right. So then we broke off our study with the bishop. Now, here's the idea. There's no proxy. Money can't do it. Good deeds can't do it. He says none of them can by any means redeem his brother, nor give to God a ransom for him. For the redemption of their life is costly, and it faileth forever, he says in verse 8, which is simply saying it is not possible to live forever on this earth. Can't do it. Therefore, there is going to be a reckoning. Now, why is he talking like this? Because he's in the pressure cooker. Who's putting the pressure on him? The ungodly, that, and wealth generally breeds ungodliness. It just does. Not all the time. Abraham was perhaps one of the most wealthiest men on the face of the earth. Job certainly was, contemporary probably with Abraham, and they were very wealthy. But they are exceptions. You remember, as you look on the outline down, I'm jumped it all the way down, but remember the camel and the eye of the needle story? The Lord said it is easier for a rich man, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. I've heard people explain that like the needle was this little opening in the city wall. But the Greek language destroys that, because the Greek language word for needle there is the common word needle for sewing needle, okay? So the Lord is emphasizing a needle, like you hold in your hand and try to get your bifocals just right so you can get the thread through it. So what's he saying? It's not an impossibility, because all things are possible with God. But the likelihood of you being able to get a camel through the eye of a needle, what are the statistic possibilities of that happening? You might do it, but it would be, the statistics numbers would be astronomical, okay? That somebody could do it. So that's what the Lord's saying. It's just preposterous. And so the psalmist here is thinking in that same vein. You see, he's thinking along that same vein. The problem with us is wealth is a relative term. I remember a coach that used to live here that thought we were very wealthy because we lived in a brick house. You know, this little red brick house. Because if a house had brick around it where they were raised, that means you had, you know, you're pretty well-to-do. So it's a relative thing. And culture depends a lot on it. Influences it, rather. So a brick home doesn't necessarily mean like the house that my mother and dad built my senior year in high school. They called it half brick. It only came up to the bottom of the windows. So that meant they were half wealthy, see? So wealth is a relative term. In certain situations, some congregation, you go into Richland Hills or somewhere like that in Fort Worth, and if it wasn't for the fact they've gone off the rails, but if you went into that congregation, the average salary there would probably be equal to 7 or 8 of us all together, would just equal in their one salary. It depends on location. It depends on the particular many-culture environment. I mean, wealth is a relative thing. The people over here on the east side of Matador think that people live on this side are very wealthy people, that they're very wealthy people. So remember, it's a relative thing, okay? So he says in verse 9 that he should still live always, that he should not see corruption. And there's nothing. You see how this is going? You know, he's saying these people think they have the world by the tail on a downhill pull, and nothing will ever interfere with their power. That's why death is so cruel to those that have wealth and power, because when death comes, it eliminates wealth and it destroys power. For there is no power beyond the grave. Okay? For there is no wealth to be enjoyed beyond the grave. But you'll be amazed at how people think that there is. All you have to do is work in a funeral home 2 or 3 years, and you'll be surprised how people that you think are normally thinking American people, how they look at wealth beyond the grave. And so he says, there are those that think that wealth will keep them from corruption, for he shall see it, wise men die, or He seeth these wise men die. The fool and the senseless alike perish and leave their wealth to others. Their inward thought is that their houses shall continue forever and their dwelling places to all generations. And you know that's not true. They're digging in the side of one of the pyramids right now. When I see that, I think, and we go into burial grounds, and we dig up burial grounds, and we get bones of our ancestors that's been there 400, 500, 600 years, and we dig those up, and then we talk about the culture and all of that stuff, and we lay people to rest out here at East Mound. And 600 or 800 years from now, you and I would not like to think people be out there with some kind of bulldozer backhoe digging all those folks up out there just to seeing what kind of molars they had, what kind of, it seems like nothing's sacred as far as leave the cemeteries alone. But yet we go into these places where the culture that preceded us or whatever, and we dig all of that up. And what we found is the same lesson every time, that they didn't take anything with them, nothing. Some cultures would kill the horse, put the favorite weapons, and even kill the first wife and bury her and all those possessions with the man. Bury them in the ground, and when we've opened graves like that, guess what? There's the horse's bones, there's the wife's bones, there's all of the treasures of life all right there with him. Didn't take it anywhere, and he's not there. He's not there. You see, this is what he's talking about. This is not something you want to sing about, is it? I told the song leader one time, sing something that's real peppy. This is our first time here at this nursing home, and let's really give them a real pump up. Okay, yeah. And you know what the first song he led was? When my body's lying in the cold, cold grave. That really picks you out there. He and I weren't on the same page. We weren't on the same page. So here you have this understanding that the psalmist has, that the wealth apparently do not have, the wealthy, the ungodly, the unrighteous. Their inward thought is their houses shall continue forever, and their dwelling places to all generations. They name things after themselves. They name streets after themselves. They name lands after themselves. We build statues to themselves. And what happens 2 or 3 generations later to those statues? That's right, and tears them down, moves them off to a little corner lot. It just doesn't last. I'm telling you, things fail in the 3rd generation. I was taught that years ago in college, Missouri Southern, where I went to college, studying crisis counseling. And one thing that I learned from one of the professors is that things fail in the 3rd generation. And we look at Christian colleges. In the 3rd generation, they fall away from truth. We look at America today. We're in the 3rd generation from World War II. And our kids could care less. Generally speaking, they could care less. It doesn't even, Memorial Day, for example, and I talked to the superintendent of schools up here several years ago. They had school on Memorial Day, and I went up there, and I talked to him. I said, what are you doing? It doesn't mean a thing to you, does it? It doesn't mean a thing. You have not put out 1 ounce of sweat of inconvenience for this country. You've enjoyed the benefits of all of the blessings, and you choose to have school on the day that's set apart to honor those that have died in order that you can enjoy all these benefits without 1 ounce of sweat from you. And I really let him have it. And they hadn't had it on school on Memorial Day since. But you see, the 3rd generation is so easily forget. So we build statues to ourselves, we build monuments to ourselves, and the 3rd generation throws them away because they won't last. They just will not last. their inward thought is, it'll continue forever. No, it won't. No, it won't. And you can name the street, and Martin Luther King Avenue and all of that. And you can name them Robert E. Lee, and you can name them Useless Grant. You can name them whatever you want. Isn't that his name? Something like that. I think, and my grandma used to call him that. See, my grandmother, when people were born in 1888 and 1890, like my grandparents were, the Civil War was so raw in their lives. Raw. And you couldn't talk about it without drawing immense heat from them because they had been trampled down by it. Their parents had. And then the carpetbaggers and all that. You couldn't talk to my grandmother. And Jesse James was a hero. She cooked supper for Jesse James, and he left silver dollars in the feed box out in the barn when he left. Jesse James was their hero because he fought against the Union banks and the Union railroads and all that kind of stuff. So, the third generation forgets. I'm the third generation from that. And Jesse James means nothing to me. But he didn't keep me from starving either by throwing silver dollars in the feed box either. So we look at this. But man, being in honor, abideth not. He is like the beast that perishes. The whole idea here is, just like the beast in the field, just like a cow, it dies and we die. I don't know how old I knew a guy that had a horse that was 42 years old, and he should have been put down years before that because he wouldn't shed off. He didn't have any teeth, and the guy fed him a mixed-up mixture of dairy feed and all that kind of stuff to try to keep him alive. He was 42 years old. That's what the guy said on the horse. Now I had a 22-year-old horse, but I've never had good claim to 40. But the horse is going to die just like the cow dies, and the cow's going to die just like the dog dies. And you know what? The man's going to die just like the cow and the dog and the horse. And there's not money in the world that will keep it from happening. Not money in the world. Their way is their folly. Well, what's their folly? Their folly is the trusting in the foolishness of wealth, or trusting in the power that wealth brings, that's going to give them some kind of extra special longevity. And it does not. Can it buy better health care? Yeah, sure it can. There are people able to go to better hospitals because they can afford it. Because the American Medical Society about 1978 or 9 moved from a missionary calling to a financial profit thing. Before that, it didn't matter whether you had money or not. But now it matters whether you have money or not if you get any care or if you have good insurance. And we're all aware of that. They are appointed, look at verse 14. They are appointed as a flock for Sheol. Death shall be their shepherd. Can you imagine that? You know what a shepherd does? It gathers all the sheep up, all the sheep, and, it gathers them up. Here is death gathering everybody up. See the picture there? The picture is death, and the upright shall have dominion over them in the morning. And their beauty shall be for Sheol to consume. The worms in the grave know no difference between a rich man and a poor man. They know no difference at all. They have no appreciation for the rich man or the poor man. And here, the simple statement, the upright shall have dominion in the morning. What's that mean? Huh? In death is darkness. In life is light. So this is heavy figurative language. And so when the light comes, then the righteous are going to be in the right place. They're going to have the upper hand. or they're going to have the better place. You see the figure? They're going to have the upper hand. Where's the wicked? Well, in the parable in Luke 16, you have the rich man fared sumptuously all of his life, and when he died, the Bible says he was buried. But the poor man, Lazarus, there's a contrast of what we're talking about right here. But the poor man, Lazarus, when he died, what happened to him? He was carried to Abraham's bosom. Now, you know, in Palestine, in the day the Lord told this parable, that they didn't leave the bodies just laying around. You know, the poor man was also buried by somebody. That's why they had a place they called what kind of field? Potter's field. They had the place for the poor to be buried. So don't get remember, this is a parable, all right? It's a parable. You can't build a doctrine on a parable like Fuqua did. But you build the poor man, the Bible says he died and angels carried him to Abraham's bosom. All right, that's a euphemism in Hebrew for heaven. Where Abraham is, that's where everything is wonderful. If you're a Jew, you're with Father Abraham, you see. That's just like saying down here in Alabama or Georgia, or southern Arkansas, or East Texas, you're in tall cotton. What's that mean? It means it's top notch. We use euphemisms like this all the time. And they did too. And that's what that idea is. Well, the kids are in. We're out of time. Read the rest of this, and you'll see. Verse 19, he shall go to the generation of his fathers, and they shall never see the light. So there is no hope. There is no hope for the ungodly wealthy. And this psalmist is wanting everybody to understand that.